Harvard, Yale, Broadway, Hollywood, Oscars, Gates, MacArthur, Carnegie, NIH, NBA, Wimbledon, Pinnacle, top. Trash, slum, jail, fail, flunk, give up, quit, betray, beneath, bottom. Arbitrary sounds laden with values, loaded up with judgment. Yale, jail, almost the same. How can a Y or a J make so much difference? We're taught, and we learn. We're taught what to value, and we're taught what's valueless. Like breathing, we internalize those values and then attach them to signs, symbols, images, emblems, tokens, sounds. Somebody holds up a token or pronounces a sound, and we have an emotional response, just like many people stand for a flag without thinking. There's a terrifying story in Dostoevsky's novel, The Brothers Karamazov, where one of the brothers is explaining why he doubts the existence of God. And he talks about how a Russian soldier bounces a Turkish baby on the point of his bayonet high up in the air while the baby's mother watches, howling. The Russian soldiers laugh and cheer. I've remembered this scene since I first read it as a teenager, because it's repeated every day in the news, more or less. And for me, the Russian soldier torturing the Muslim baby is just a reflection of our human capacity to symbolize values. We're taught. We learn. We internalize the values. We put them into symbols. And when those symbols become detached from human reality, we can be cruel to our brothers and sisters and treat them as if they're sacrificial objects, scapegoats, instead of persons. There's an important lesson in the Jewish mysticism about the origins of evil. God's right arm is mercy, but his left arm is judgment. And originally, mercy and judgment worked together. They took turns. They were balanced. But the left arm of judgment needed righteous anger to operate, and so in its passion, it began to take extra turns to itself. Working harder and harder, it grew stronger, larger, more muscular, out of proportion to the right arm of mercy. And working, it ballooned until finally it tore apart from God's body and went whirling off into space, an autonomous, independent thing, the thing we now call evil. The origin of evil is judgment symbolized that takes on a life of its own. I myself attended Yale College as an undergraduate. Now I teach in a jail for adolescent girls, mostly from Baltimore City, some of whom are charged with very serious crimes. Some aren't charged with any crimes at all. They are foster children, wards of the state. But the state can't find a home to assign them to, so it throws them into jail as a safe alternative to being on the street. There's nothing to distinguish the humanity of my former classmates at Yale from the humanity of the girls I teach now. But the difference between how the society values the one group compared to how it values the other is almost impossible to conceive or describe. The contrast was brought to my attention recently by one of my students. I can only refer to her as EJ by her initials because, as you know, the identity of incarcerated minors must be concealed by law. EJ came to me for help with a project she was working on for Women's History Month about the architect Maya Lin, designer of the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. Now, Maya and I had been classmates. I didn't know her well. We haven't seen each other since we were seniors in 1981. But I did know Maya well enough to know that the Vietnam Memorial was far from an innocent design. It's a powerful and moving work that's widely admired for its ability to personalize the war at the same time as it forces us to think about the whole scope of the war's tragedy. And Maya designed it to literally sink into the landscape so that no one would be able to feel triumphal about the destruction of 50,000 Americans or of 1 million Vietnamese. Our common humanity, but not our common value. 50,000, 1 million. How do we weigh those numbers? How many Iraqis did we kill? The great and rightly honored Maya Lin. But the great E.J. also, my student, who's studying Maya for inspiration, but whose name I'm not permitted to give because somehow the fact of her incarceration is meant to be shameful to her. Why shame? Doesn't the history of war and cruelty warn us about scapegoating others? The Vietnam Memorial teaches that our judgments are often wrong about what's honorable and what's shameful. The beautiful, intelligent, brave young women in the jail deserve to be clothed in robes of honor. Nothing shameful about being human. Our acts, maybe, but not our being, not our names. We hope that when EJ gets out of jail, that she'll be able to join the Baltimore Algebra Project, an organization that's found a way to honor many young men and women in a practical way in Baltimore City, people who are struggling against depression. I'd like to tell you a little bit about it. Because as it turns out, young people don't need to wait for anybody's judgment before they can share knowledge and skills with their peers. They don't need anybody's authority or credential. They can just teach how to multiply, how to solve an equation, how to publish a book of poems, how to debate a public policy. They can teach, and they can also organize themselves to demand that they should be paid for their teaching. So young people in the Algebra Project have earned more than $4 million in the last 10 years or so for doing exactly this kind of work. The organization is entirely staffed and run by young people under 25 years old, mostly high school students at any given time. They not only teach, but they also agitate on the model of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, the legendary civil rights organization from the 1960s that created leaders like John Lewis, Diane Nash, Bob Moses, with their great mentor, Ella Baker. And so the students of the Baltimore Algebra Project successfully stopped the construction of a $100 million youth jail that Governor Martin O'Malley wanted to build. And if you've seen any video of student marches or demonstrations from the 2015 Baltimore uprising, then you saw Algebra Project students leading those demonstrations. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about two young women in particular who've led many marches, Katie Arevalo and Marie Makuba. Katie, her parents, fled the civil war in El Salvador about 20 years ago. And Marie is herself a refugee from Congo. The United States, of course, plays a major role in creating carnage in both countries. Either Katie or Marie could have been killed, tortured, bounced on the end of a bayonet, or never born. But today, they're both first-year students in college. They taught mathematics and organizing when they were in high school for the Baltimore Algebra Project and earned thousands of dollars a year using their minds. The cash was vitally important to them and to their families for survival. They used it to keep the lights on, pay phone bills, transportation, college fees. And the cash isn't the only important thing. They also have the sense of power and autonomy that comes from being members of a youth-led organization where they themselves help to make decisions about who gets paid, how much for what, where they negotiate contracts with schools and other institutions for tutoring and student leadership services, $400,000 a year worth of contracts. And so this economic basis means that they don't have to wait for anybody's permission to begin to act. They authorize themselves to move. They credential themselves. They're only documented by their peers. And their parents, too, authorized themselves to move to the United States. And any of them could be picked up and thrown in jail at a moment's notice as if they'd done something shameful for their activism, for the color of their skin, for the fact that they're strange in white supremacist America. But Katie and Marie have a student organization around them, a mini society that protects them and that allows them to develop their own values and symbols, like the red X logo, no education, no life. It's amusing when they have a demonstration at the school board for smaller class sizes or more jobs in knowledge work. They'll stick stickers with the no education, no life logo all over the building. And the next day, the school board sends people down to scrape the stickers off as if no education, no life is too radical a slogan for a school building. Self-documented, the young people in the Algebra Project challenge us to think about the values that we breathe in with the air. I imagine that this audience here is relatively welcoming of the worthiness of people at the bottom. But we might find it harder to question the fancy colleges and the fancy philanthropies and the big name institutions with their prizes and fellowships, opportunities and rewards. We can't have it both ways. If we're going to be impressed by names like Maya Lin or impressed by degrees from important universities, then we're likely to be suspicious or even afraid of a jail classroom. But we'd have our symbolic values backwards. We should be suspicious of the people at the top because they are often cruel and unjust. And we should want to meet first the tough girls in jail or the mothers who figured out how to extract their daughters from America's imperial battlegrounds. So you should also think about how to challenge the symbols of excellence. Don't be swayed by their aura. Judgment that takes on a life of its own is nothing short of evil. Tilt towards the side of mercy. Condemn the society's judgments. Disdain its evaluations. That's how you'll get to know people like Katie, Marie, and EJ, angels and geniuses.